I think the thing that I love about this show is how complex every character has turned out to be. I think very early on, the general consensus, I know this is how I felt, Bebin would be the evil character, snake wielder, kind of seems a little shady, already died at the beginning of the show, just obviously, you think in the evil trope prince. And then Appease, this kind of like loyal spear user who seemingly would die for Boji, right? You just kind of get the natural impression of where those characters would go. And the fact that we're getting so much for a character who is being presented as dead, I'm still crossing my fingers that Bebin is going to pop back up, that the snakes, when they kind of pulled him underground, they're going to have some healing venom or something like that. But even if they actually committed to killing him, the fact that they're further fleshing out who he was as a character post-death or post-seemingly death is something that's really engaging, because the magic mirror we knew we should never trust, but when you have something whispering in your ear for so long, it's understandable why Daida would look at it as even an ally in a situation like that, after defeating the guards that were trying to force an elixir that we were presented as something that would give him power. My assumption now after this episode is that Elixir is maybe some form of she's trying to overtake the body of Daida. The reason I say that is that she seemingly used to have a normal body, right? I mean, we're getting flashbacks, everything like that. Appea's reaction seems like she was a normal person with some pretty magical powers, and she seemingly has him wrapped around her finger in terms of fear. Not loyalty, but fear, it seems like. I think that's a much more compelling narrative for someone who seemingly was so devoted and loyal to, King Bose, to then seemingly switch immediately from wanting to protect. And I mean, if someone's trying to assassinate me for standing up for King Boji, then, clearly I need to kill this prince because he's clearly going to hurt Boji. You see the line of thinking. But when you get someone who's literally seemingly stuck in a mirror, and that can make you immediately turn and force that elixir down his throat, and she's saying that it was not an elixir of power. It says to me something happened and she's trapped somehow, maybe it's just a spiritual thing, and I have a feeling that she wants to overtake his body or something like that, or some form of really corrupt thing. Either way, the elixir's worse than we ever imagined, and that means very good things for the narrative, but very terrible things for these characters and these brothers. Because I honestly think both Daida and Boji are equally interesting characters, and I'm glad that they're giving both some pretty genuine spotlight and not really having one overshadow the other, which makes it very interesting, because when someone who's loyal to Boji comes in and is trying to kill Daida for him trying to kill him, you're naturally kind of conflicted, I find, being like, well, this guy seemingly is loyal to Boji, but I really like Daida at this point, so I'd be okay if he killed him. And I'm like, what am I saying? Why am I flip-flopping here? They really have you invested in the character arcs, and I really don't know what's going to happen to Daida now, because if he does go corrupt and evil, kill Boji, it's the elixir's doing, not his character. I really think Daida's character is incredibly strong-willed. I think they did a great job with that mini flashback where they show you the key highlights of his life, the first of which was the mother kind of comforting a crying Boji, as he from a distance was probably feeling a little envious that his own mother, pretty much feels like maybe he was giving favoritism, the talented son who, maybe wants a little praise once in a while, but then you have this kind of crybaby who is heir to the throne but really doesn't feel fit for it. You're training day in and day out, sweating, bleeding, and, there's this amazing swordmaster who's training a kid who wants to play in the dirt. And when your father dies, the least qualified king candidate is given it, and you still refuse to take that elixir, that easy way out. You're young, and your potential has not reached its limits yet. You understand completely. I think we've already understood it, but to have that kind of mini flashback to really signify, what made him sort of resent Boji, but also really refuse essentially what was being presented as a gift to immediately have the throne, because he's struggled his whole life and he's not going to take the easy way out if he has any choice. And sadly for Prince Daida, he didn't have a choice in this episode. I do think the whole fear scene was very well done between the spear user Appease as well as, Magic Mirror Daida and things like that, because he is someone who still feels loyal to Boji given what the King's Will wanted, and seemingly the King's Will is what he's the most loyal to before we got the flashback. The flashback didn't give me the impression that necessarily it's a form of loyalty to the Magic Mirror, but more so fear, that fear that he used to have back in the day. You got a very different sense of character in the past versus the present. The present, he's kind of like this badass kind of spear user. In the past, he kind of felt like someone who was a bit of a crybaby or a bit of someone you wouldn't think would be a warrior. So the fact that he could immediately go from the most loyal of servants to then just bending to her will, it's something that says to me that that fear that was once there could easily come back with a single snap of her fingers, and even trapped in a mirror, it's something that he can't disobey, which is pretty crazy. And I guess we'll see where Daida goes from here. Though I will say Bojji and Kage's kind of dynamic on screen this week remains to be just as good. The King of the Underworld section was interesting because you immediately knew he wasn't who they were looking for, because they did a pretty clever directing choice where, you know, they're saying, oh, who are we looking for? And then he says, yeah, that's gonna be me. And then in the background, the two, like, awesome looking guards. I mean, this, like, gold plate armor, and just, you knew they were gonna be some badasses. I just wasn't expecting some would have a soft spot underneath that armor. But the fact that they gave, like, a little, like, kind of like, what the hell did he just say? Like, we know that's bullshit. But it's interesting because you completely understand why people look down on Bojji. As much as I love that cinnamon roll, as much as I want him to have the world on his shoulders, in terms of what he has to offer, he has speed, but even with that speed, how is he going to get through that plate of armor? As blunt and rude as this king might be, he does speak a lot of facts that, yeah, it's impressive, and we know because we play video games, we've seen stories, there is like a rogue assassin build that would be perfect for him if he could just gain a little muscle mass or something like that, because he still needs to be able to, like, stab a bitch, even if there wasn't armor, and it really doesn't feel like even if he held a knife up right now that he could actually stab muscle, especially with how bulky some of these warriors are. So you understand where the criticism's coming from, but it doesn't change the fact that we want to root for him, and the fact that even when he's trying to pick up, you know, rocks, I mean, the first rock clearly was not going to be something he could do, but I was kind of expecting a Hercules moment, maybe like, you know, Sword in the Stone moment, the little rock, but still pretty big for himself. I thought he was going to be able to move it a little bit, but no, he was crying, he's trying to wipe those tears, prove that he's okay, and just the fact that Kage of all characters, I never thought he'd be an emotional character. Kage just kind of felt like he would kind of be like a bit of a dick, but he would be a loyal dick, sort of like, hey, I'm going to poke fun of you, Bojji, but I'm always going to be by your side. Instead, there's two crybaby best friends, and I completely love that dynamic. And the fact that the reason he took up the name that they were looking for, and I mean, the guard's right, it was kind of their own fault for not remembering what the name was, and that in return has some interesting family drama with, you know, two brothers, and how, you know, this King of the Underworld may be a little more envious of his brother, and I wouldn't be shocked in the slightest if he actually wasn't the King of the Underworld. You know, maybe that title technically belongs to his brother, but, you know, he takes it up for himself or something. But it'll be interesting because apparently the brother is very wise, and you wouldn't look at him as like a warrior per se, but you wouldn't look at Bojji as a warrior either, so maybe wisdom is all he really needs. Like, you know, they need to craft a perfect kind of fighting build, or, you know, maybe magic will be on the table. You don't quite know, because we know magic's a part of this world, so maybe he could, like, amplify his strength via some form of magic or something. I mean, the queen has healing magic, so it's not completely off the table, I think, to theorize like that. Either way, it just has a lot of great character points. The expressive animation still remains to be top tier, and you just want the best for both of these brothers, and you know, now that the elixir has been forced down Daida's throat, it's hard to say if that strong will is still gonna be there, or because I kind of feel like it's gonna be one of two things: either an elixir to try to like take over his body, or a mind control situation. Either way, it's not gonna be good. But if he can break through that elixir and remain in control, Daida's willpower has to be some of the strongest I've seen in anime. I mean, he's already a respectable character. He's done things that I disagree with, but I think that's part of being human, especially in a pretty complex time period. So it's just great to see how the characters are continuing to evolve, and still fingers crossed that Bebin is going to pop back up after, you know, maybe like half the anime goes and he pops back up healed as strong as ever. But let me know your thoughts and feelings down below on Ranking of Kings. What do you think is going to happen next week? Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new around here. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.